Welcome to a list of forbidden mountains you are not allowed to climb. Every mountain on this list is forbidden for a different reason. Some are protected by governments, indigenous tribes, or religious traditions. Others are off limits because getting too close could put you in serious danger. As the list goes on, each mountain becomes stranger, more mysterious, or more heavily restricted. Mountain number 3 is a towering stone spire so narrow it barely looks real, and the last people allowed to climb it were filming a Clint Eastwood movie. Number 4 sits on an island so restricted and remote that almost nobody on Earth has ever seen it in person. Number 5, located in the United States, hides a nuclear war command center, built behind blast doors inside solid granite. Number 6 destroyed an entire capital city, and the ruins are still sitting inside a forbidden zone. Number 8 is a mountain in North Korea that became one of the most closely watched places on Earth after mysterious earthquakes began coming from beneath its slopes. And the final mountain on this list is so important to the ruling regime that it transformed it into the birthplace of its former supreme leader. So make sure you stick around until the end, because I can almost guarantee you've never heard of at least some of these mountains, and the stories behind them are even stranger than the peaks themselves. But for now, let's start with mountain number 1. When you think of forbidden mountains, Colombia probably isn't the first country that comes to mind. But hidden along the Caribbean coast is the highest mountain in the country, a peak surrounded by sacred indigenous lands, remote wilderness, and restrictions that keep most people far away from its summit. Hidden above the Caribbean coast is Pico Simón Bolivar, one of the 2 highest mountains in Colombia. The summit rises to around 18,700 feet, or about 5,700 meters, inside the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. And this is not a normal mountain range. It rises almost directly from the Caribbean Sea, going from tropical beaches to permanent snow in a distance so short that the mountains can be seen from the coast. But the reason Pico Simón Bolívar belongs on this list is not just geography. The mountain sits inside the sacred ancestral territory of the Arhuaco, Kogi, Wiwa, and Kankuamo peoples, who see the Sierra Nevada as the spiritual heart of the world. For them, the highest peaks are not just empty summits waiting to be climbed, they are part of a living sacred landscape. Because of that, independent mountaineering and casual recreational access to the High Sierra are heavily restricted. This is not a mountain where you simply book a guide, show up with an ice axe, and start walking toward the summit. Access depends on indigenous authority, protected land, and local permission. And there is another layer. For decades, this region was also affected by Colombia's armed conflict. Drug traffickers, guerrilla groups, and illegal armed groups use parts of the Sierra as remote corridors, making access dangerous even before the cultural restrictions are considered. So Pico Simón Bolívar is forbidden in a very different way. Not by one gate and not by one warning sign, but by a combination of sacred law, indigenous control, protected ecosystems, and a mountain range that outsiders were never really meant to treat like a playground. From the Caribbean coast of Colombia, we now travel halfway around the world to the Himalayas, home to the highest mountains on Earth, countless climbing legends, and one peak so sacred that climbers who reach the summit are expected not to stand on its highest point. This is mountain number 2. At 8,586 meters, or 28,169 feet, Kanchenjunga is the 3rd highest mountain on Earth. Located on the border of Nepal and India, it is one of the most famous peaks in the Himalayas, and one of only a handful of mountains visible from hundreds of miles away on a clear day. For decades, climbers have traveled here hoping to stand on one of the highest points on the planet. But there is one problem. The summit itself is effectively forbidden. Kanchenjunga is considered sacred by the people of Sikkim, who view the mountain as the home of powerful protective deities and an important part of their spiritual traditions. When the first successful expedition reached the mountain in 1955, the British team made an unusual promise. Out of respect for local beliefs, they would stop just short of the true summit. And they kept that promise. What makes this story remarkable is that the tradition survived. Even today, climbers who spend weeks crossing glaciers, climbing steep ice walls, and surviving some of the harshest weather in the Himalayas often stop only a few feet below the highest point. Technically, they could take the final steps. Nothing physically prevents them from doing so. but doing so would be considered deeply disrespectful to the millions of people who regard Kanchenjunga as a sacred mountain. And on a peak where reaching the summit can already take years of preparation, many climbers choose to respect that tradition, which creates one of the strangest situations in mountaineering. From the Himalayas, we now travel to the deserts of the American Southwest, home to some of the most recognizable landscapes in the world, towering sandstone formations, and one rock spire so unusual that the last people allowed to climb it were filming a Clint Eastwood movie. This is mountain number 3. At first glance, Totem Pole barely looks real. Rising from the floor of Monument Valley, this narrow sandstone spire stands more than 450 feet above the desert and is one of the most recognizable rock formations in the American Southwest. And for a brief period, climbers were obsessed with it. The first successful ascent came in 1957, when a team of climbers spent 3 days battling wind, rain, and fragile sandstone to reach the top. But that success would not open the mountain to more visitors. Instead, it would help close it. Totem Pole stands inside Navajo Nation territory, where many rock formations are considered culturally and spiritually important. As climbing activity increased, Navajo authorities became increasingly concerned about outsiders treating sacred places as recreational climbing objectives. Eventually, climbing on formations in Monument Valley was prohibited, which brings us to one of the coolest stories in climbing history. In the mid-1970s, director Clint Eastwood arrived in Monument Valley to film scenes for the Eiger Sanction. To make the movie, his team needed access to Totem Pole. After negotiations with Navajo authorities, special permission was granted. The crew removed old climbing hardware from the rock, prepared the summit for filming, and completed the climb. According to multiple accounts, they became the last people ever allowed to stand on top of Totem Pole. Today, millions of tourists photograph the formation every year. You can drive past it, you can walk near it, you can stare at it for as long as you want. But unless you're Clint Eastwood and it's still 1975, you're not climbing it. From the deserts of the American Southwest, we now travel thousands of miles south into the Southern Ocean. Home to some of the roughest seas on Earth, powerful storms, and one of the most isolated pieces of land anywhere on the planet. At the center of it stands a volcano that very few people have ever seen with their own eyes. This is mountain number 4. At 2,745 meters, or 9,006 feet, Big Ben is the highest mountain on Heard Island. And despite being Australia's largest active volcano, almost nobody has ever stood on its summit. The reason starts with its location. Heard Island sits deep in the Southern Ocean, roughly 4,000 kilometers from Australia and about 1,700 kilometers from Antarctica. It is so isolated that reaching the island requires a major expedition across some of the roughest waters on Earth, but remoteness is only part of the story. Today, Heard Island is protected as both a nature reserve and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Unauthorized entry has been prohibited, and anyone hoping to visit must obtain permission from the Australian government. For most people, that permission is never granted. As a result, very few humans have ever reached the mountain. In fact, only 3 expeditions are known to have successfully climbed Big Ben. The first reached the summit in 1965, the second followed in 1983, and the third arrived more than 15 years later, during an expedition in 1999 and 2000. That's it. Only 3 successful summit parties on a mountain that has existed for thousands of years. Even today, the volcano remains active. Satellite images regularly capture steam, ash, and fresh lava flows near the summit, which means Big Ben is one of the rare mountains where the challenge begins long before the climb itself. Because before you can worry about glaciers, weather, or volcanic activity, you first have to solve a much bigger problem: getting permission to visit one of the most restricted islands on Earth. From one of the most remote islands on Earth, we now travel to the Rocky Mountains of the United States, home to vast wilderness, famous national parks, and a mountain that looks completely ordinary from the outside, but hidden deep inside, it is one of the most secure military facilities ever built. This is mountain number 5. At first glance, Cheyenne Mountain looks completely ordinary. There are no giant warning signs visible from space, no obvious clue that one of the most important military facilities in American history is hidden inside it, and that is exactly the point. During the Cold War, the United States needed a place that could continue operating even if the country came under nuclear attack. The answer was to build a command center inside a mountain. Construction began in 1961, and by 1966, Cheyenne Mountain had become the headquarters of NORAD, the organization responsible for monitoring North American airspace and detecting incoming missile attacks. But this was not a bunker in the usual sense. Engineers blasted deep into the granite and created an underground complex nearly 2,000 feet beneath the surface. Inside were 15 separate buildings. Not rooms, buildings, each one mounted on giant springs designed to absorb the shockwave from a nuclear explosion. The entrance was protected by blast doors weighing more than 20 tons each. If an attack was detected, the entire facility could seal itself off from the outside world. For decades, military personnel inside the mountain tracked Soviet bombers, ballistic missiles, and anything else that might threaten North America. And while the Cold War ended, the mountain never disappeared. The complex remains operational today as a backup command center. As a result, large parts of Cheyenne Mountain remain restricted to the public, including military areas near the summit and access routes leading into the complex, which means that, unlike most mountains on this list, Cheyenne Mountain is forbidden for a reason hidden beneath the surface, because somewhere inside this mountain is a facility built for one of the worst scenarios humanity has ever imagined: nuclear war. From the Rocky Mountains of the United States, we now travel to a small island in the Caribbean, home to tropical forests, colorful coastlines, and a volcano that completely changed the fate of an entire country. What happened here forced thousands of people to flee, buried a capital city, and created one of the largest permanent exclusion zones in the Caribbean. This is mountain number 6. For centuries, Soufriere Hills was just another mountain on the Caribbean island of Montserrat. People built homes around it, businesses opened nearby, and on the volcano's southwestern slopes stood Plymouth, the capital of the island. Then, in 1995, the mountain woke up. After centuries of dormancy, Soufriere Hills began erupting, sending ash high into the atmosphere and forcing evacuations across southern Montserrat. At first, many residents believed they would eventually return. Instead, the situation continued to get worse. On June 25, 1997, a powerful eruption generated pyroclastic flows that killed 19 people and swept across parts of the island. Plymouth was abandoned. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath ash and volcanic debris. Roads vanished, buildings were buried, and what had once been the center of life on the island suddenly became a ghost town. What makes this story so unusual is that Plymouth never stopped being the capital. Even today, it remains the official capital of Montserrat despite having no residents. As volcanic activity continued, the government declared the southern half of the island an exclusion zone. Large parts of the area remain off-limits, including the summit region around Chance's Peak. Today, visitors can still see abandoned buildings emerging from layers of ash, frozen in place almost 3 decades after the eruption. Most mountains on this list are forbidden because someone decided to protect them. Soufriere Hills is different. This mountain made itself forbidden. From the Caribbean, we now travel across the world to Indonesia, a country home to more active volcanoes than almost anywhere else on Earth, in a mountain that millions of people live alongside despite knowing exactly what it is capable of. Its slopes were visited by pilgrims and monitored by scientists. This is mountain number 7. At 2,930 meters, or 9,613 feet, Mount Merapi is one of the most active volcanoes on Earth. Located near the Indonesian city of Yogyakarta, it has spent centuries erupting, rebuilding, and erupting again. But unlike most volcanoes, Merapi did not just force people to evacuate temporarily. After the devastating 2010 eruption, the Indonesian government established a prohibited zone on parts of the mountain where permanent settlement is no longer allowed. Entire villages that once existed on the slopes suddenly found themselves inside an area considered too dangerous for people to live. The reason becomes obvious when you look at Merapi's history. The volcano is infamous for producing pyroclastic flows, fast-moving avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and rock capable of destroying everything in their path. During the 2010 eruption, more than 350 people were killed, and hundreds of thousands were forced to evacuate. Entire communities disappeared beneath volcanic debris. Today, authorities continue to monitor the mountain around the clock. Whenever activity increases, exclusion zones around the summit are expanded and access is restricted. Trails close, evacuations begin, and areas that welcomed visitors only weeks earlier can suddenly become off-limits. What makes Merapi different from the other mountains on this list is that nobody is keeping people away because of religion, military secrets, or politics. The restrictions exist because the mountain has repeatedly proven it can become deadly with very little warning. From Indonesia, we now travel to one of the most secretive countries on Earth, a place where access is tightly controlled, information is limited, and an entire mountain became part of a nuclear weapons program. For years, powerful explosions deep beneath its slopes shook the ground, triggered earthquakes, and left scientists wondering what was happening inside. This is mountain number 8. At 2,205 meters, or 7,234 feet, Mantap Mountain does not look particularly unusual. But for more than a decade, it became one of the most closely watched mountains on Earth. The reason was hidden underground. Beneath Mantap Mountain sits the Punggye-ri nuclear test site, where North Korea conducted all 6 of its nuclear weapons tests between 2006 and 2017. Each explosion took place inside tunnels carved deep into the mountain, far from the eyes of the outside world. Scientists, intelligence agencies, and governments could not see what was happening inside. Instead, they listened. Every test sent seismic waves through the earth, allowing researchers thousands of miles away to estimate the size of the explosions. Then came the final test in September 2017. The blast was so powerful that it triggered a magnitude 6.3 earthquake and was detected around the world. Satellite imagery later showed that parts of the mountain had physically moved. Some researchers estimated that Mantap shifted sideways by more than 3 meters, while others concluded that sections of the mountain had partially collapsed. Soon, a new phrase began appearing in reports: tired mountain syndrome. The idea was simple. After years of underground nuclear explosions, the rock inside Mantap Mountain may have become fractured and unstable. Chinese scientists warned that further testing could even risk the collapse of the mountain and the release of radioactive material into the environment. For years, one of the most secretive governments on Earth used an entire mountain as a testing laboratory, and by the time the world learned what had happened inside, the mountain itself may have been permanently changed. We remain in North Korea. But while Mantap Mountain became famous because of what was hidden beneath it, the next mountain is important because of what North Korea claims happened there. It is the highest mountain on the Korean peninsula, a symbol of national identity, and one of the most politically significant mountains on Earth. This is mountain number 9. At 2,744 meters, or 9,003 feet, Mount Paektu is the highest mountain on the Korean peninsula. It is also one of the most politically important mountains on Earth. For centuries, Paektu has been regarded as a sacred mountain by Koreans. But in North Korea, its significance goes far beyond religion or geography. The mountain sits at the center of the country's national mythology and appears constantly in state propaganda, monuments, textbooks, and official narratives. The reason is a story taught to generations of North Koreans. According to the North Korean government, Kim Jong-il was born at a secret guerrilla camp on the slopes of Mount Paektu during the struggle against Japanese occupation. The site is treated as one of the most important places in the country and forms a key part of the state's founding mythology. There is just one problem. Most historians believe it never happened. Historical records indicate that Kim Jong-il was most likely born in the Soviet Union, hundreds of miles away from Mount Paektu. Yet inside North Korea, the official story remains unchanged. What makes the mountain unusual is that access depends entirely on which side of the border you approach from. Every year, thousands of tourists visit Mount Paektu from China. They can stand beside the crater lake, explore the surrounding landscape, and experience one of the most famous mountains in Asia. The North Korean side is very different. Access is tightly controlled, foreign visitors are heavily restricted, and the locations connected to the country's official mythology are not places people can simply visit on their own. As a result, one side of the mountain functions as a tourist destination, while the other serves as one of the most important political symbols in North Korea, which makes Mount Paektu a fitting final entry on this list. because unlike the other mountains we have visited, its greatest power does not come from its height, its danger, or what lies beneath it. It comes from a story that helped shape an entire country. And that's it. If you feel like some famous forbidden peaks were missing from this list, there's a good chance they appeared in one of the previous videos. You can check those out next. Thanks for watching.